What if I told you that everything you believed about northern wooden architecture is wrong? For many years, we mistakenly believed that buildings made of hewn logs were too fragile to withstand the icy ocean winds. Many thought that simple wooden walls were easily blown through and completely incapable of retaining heat for long. However, Scandinavian craftsmen had a superb understanding of the properties of wood and knew how to build truly reliable shelters that would last for centuries. They carefully selected the strongest tree trunks and skillfully fitted the logs together without a single gap. In fact, these rugged seafarers built veritable land-based drakkars capable of withstanding any storm lasting several days. These famous longhouses often had a unique, streamlined shape that allowed strong winds to simply glide over the massive roof. Inside such a huge dwelling, an entire community could comfortably spend the winter along with all their valuable livestock. The animals were always kept in a separate part of the building and served as an excellent source of additional vital body heat. The main ingenuity of the northern builders lay in the incredible insulation created from the simplest and most accessible natural materials. The wooden frame was generously covered with a thick layer of turf, which acted as a giant warm blanket for the entire building. Watch the video to the end, and you'll learn how ordinary earthen flooring saved these massive settlements from the bitter cold. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how these colossal structures were built? The builders never used straight tree trunks to create the main load-bearing supports of their dwellings. They searched the forest for specific oaks and ash trees, warped by constant winds on steep, rocky slopes. It was these naturally curved wooden arches that became the strongest framework for the vast hall. The builders felled the curved trunks with heavy, broad-bladed axes in early spring. At this time, the wood contained the optimal amount of moisture for subsequent long-term processing. The trunks were stripped of their bark using special scrapers, leaving the surface completely smooth and even. These logs were then dried in the open air under shelters for several long months. The uniqueness of the frame lay in the complete absence of rigid fasteners between the support posts. Instead, carpenters cut deep grooves and joined the elements using wooden dowels. This system allowed the entire massive building to sway slightly under strong gusts of storm wind. The flexibility of the structure prevented cracks from forming in the wood and the walls from collapsing during a storm. Central posts were installed in pairs along the entire length of the house at equal distances from one another. Each pair was connected at the top by a sturdy crossbeam, forming a high arch overhead. The space between these arches was filled with horizontal poles that served as supports for the future roof. The internal framework resembled an inverted ship's hull, where the arches functioned as ship's frames. Building a longhouse required several hundred thick, high-quality tree trunks. Lumberjacks carefully selected each tree, assessing the density of its growth rings and the direction of the grain. Wood with tight rings possessed incredible strength and resistance to rot in a humid climate. Craftsmen could spend weeks combing the surrounding forests in search of the perfect material for their construction. Processing each detail required tremendous physical effort and the precision of a jeweler's touch with the axe. Carpenters did not use saws, preferring to split logs along the grain using wedges. Boards split in this way retained the wood's natural grain and better repelled rainwater. A smooth surface was achieved through lengthy chiseling using small axes with perfectly sharpened edges. Assembly of the frame always began with the installation of the central load-bearing arches at the very heart of the future house. The builders then sequentially added the side sections, expanding the building outward from the center. Sturdy ropes, braided from long conifer roots, were used to lift the heavy beams. The entire team of craftsmen worked in perfect harmony, much like a ship's crew setting sail. The finished wooden frame could reach 30 meters in length and 8 meters in width. Inside this space, there was not a single partition wall dividing the vast hall into rooms. This layout ensured the unimpeded circulation of warm air from the central fire source. The high arches created a sense of grandeur and power, emphasizing the status of the owner of this magnificent structure. Even in its unfinished state, the framework demonstrated incredible resistance to external forces. Under the weight of its own mass, the wooden joints compressed, making the structure monolithic and impenetrable. The wind passed freely through the open beams without harming the wooden skeleton. It was a triumph of engineering ingenuity by people accustomed to thinking in terms of waves and ship masts. A frame built in this way could serve its owners for over 100 years without major repairs. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think of this method of constructing massive halls without a single iron nail? Please share your thoughts in the comments. And be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new historical investigations. Guess what happened next, once the wooden frame was completely ready for installation? The builders never placed heavy support posts directly on the damp Arctic soil. They formed a solid foundation from hundreds of smooth boulders gathered along the shores of the fjords. These stones became an impenetrable barrier between the damp ground and the dry wood. Site preparation began with carefully leveling the ground along the entire perimeter of the future structure. The craftsmen removed the top layer of soil down to the solid foundation using wooden shovels. Then, fine gravel was poured into the resulting trench to create a natural drainage system. This cushion drained meltwater in the spring and prevented puddles from forming under the floor. On top of the gravel, the most massive and flat granite slabs, weighing several hundred kilograms, were laid. They were moved using wooden levers and rollers made of thick pine logs. The stones were fitted tightly together, forming a smooth strip of foundation along the entire length of the building. The builders did not use clay or lime to bind these heavy monoliths together. A separate, exceptionally strong support stone was placed under each vertical support of the wooden frame. The surface of this boulder was carefully smoothed with heavy stone hammers until it was perfectly smooth. The wooden post was simply placed on top without any additional recesses or fastenings. The weight of the massive roof pressed the wood firmly against the granite, preventing it from shifting. This dry method of stone laying was critical during the winter cold. The ground beneath the house constantly froze and thawed, causing the earth's surface to shift. The unsecured foundation stones moved along with the soil, without transferring this stress to the wooden walls. If the stones had been bonded with mortar, the foundation would have quickly become covered with deep cracks. The space between the large slabs was filled with smaller cobblestones and sea pebbles. This fill served as an additional barrier against cold drafts blowing directly off the ground. The wind broke against the uneven surface of the stones and lost its destructive force. Inside the house, the floor remained protected from freezing even during the harshest January frosts. In some regions with marshy soil, builders used a more complex foundation system. They dug deep pits and filled them with tightly packed sand mixed with coal. The coal absorbed excess moisture effectively and prevented the development of decay processes in the ground. Traditional flat boulders were then laid on top of this mixture to support the walls. The precision with which the stone blocks fit together amazes modern researchers and archaeologists. Without the use of measuring instruments, the craftsmen created perfectly level horizontal surfaces tens of meters long. They relied solely on their visual judgment and years of experience working with natural materials. Each stone laid was tested for stability under the weight of several adult men. This stone belt not only protected against moisture, but also served as a kind of anchor. The enormous mass of granite held the lightweight wooden frame in place during hurricane-force winds. The house stood firmly in place, withstanding the onslaught of the Arctic elements day after day. The combination of solid stone and flexible wood created an incredibly strong and durable structure. This technology proved so successful that it was used without modification for many centuries. Were you aware of this method of laying stone foundations? In the next chapter, you'll learn how they coped with this terrible weather, turning ordinary earth into impenetrable walls. What I'm about to show you is forbidden in modern textbooks on standard brick architecture. After erecting the wooden frame, builders would begin creating a unique insulating layer made of sod. This material was cut into large rectangular blocks directly from the surrounding meadows and pastures. The dense root system of wild grasses made each block as sturdy as a modern brick. The thickness of the turf walls could reach 1.5 meters at the widest base near the ground. The blocks were laid in rows, with each subsequent layer overlapping the joints of the previous one for maximum density. Thin shrub branches were often laid between the layers of earth to give the wall additional rigidity. This entire colossal mass of earth rested on a stone foundation and an outer wooden frame. Laying the sod required strict adherence to rules to prevent it from drying out and crumbling. The blocks were always laid with the grass side down so that the roots would continue to intertwine inside the earthen wall. Over time, these layers fused into a single monolithic barrier that did not let a single breath of wind through. The outer side of the wall was covered with fresh soil on which new green grass grew in the spring. The sod-covered walls possessed phenomenal thermal insulation properties in harsh climates. The porous structure of the earth trapped air, creating a thermos-like effect around the house's interior wooden walls. In winter, this layer prevented precious heat from the hearth from escaping into the freezing night. In summer, the earthen layer kept the interior pleasantly cool under the scorching sun. In addition to the walls, turf was often used to cover the longhouse's massive gabled roof. Several layers of birch bark were laid over the wooden roof boards to protect against rainwater leaks. On top of the birch bark, earthen blocks were laid in tight rows, forming a heavy and reliable covering. The weight of this earth further pressed the wooden frame against the stone foundation. The living grass on the roof served not only an aesthetic but also a purely practical function. The plant's extensive root system absorbed excess moisture during heavy autumn downpours. The grass evaporated the water back into the atmosphere, preventing it from accumulating on the birch bark waterproofing. During dry periods, the roots held the soil in place, preventing it from being blown away by strong gusts of dry wind. The enormous weight of the turf roof required an incredibly sturdy internal wooden framework. During rainy seasons, the weight of the saturated soil nearly doubled compared to when it was dry. The builders calculated this load in advance, installing the thickest support posts. The structure withstood this colossal weight thanks to the proper distribution of pressure across the side arches. During severe storms, the sod walls demonstrated their main advantage over conventional wooden structures. Hurricane-force winds simply glided over the smooth earthen contours, finding no points of resistance. The earth absorbed the sounds of the raging elements, providing the home's inhabitants with peace and quiet inside the hall. The whistling of the wind was lost in the thickness of the turf, turning into a barely audible, muffled rumble. Repairing such walls was simple and did not require the use of complex construction tools. The damaged section of earth was carefully cut out with a shovel and replaced with a fresh block from the nearest field. The seams quickly grew over with grass, restoring the wall's original strength and monolithic appearance. This eco-friendly material was constantly renewed, serving as a reliable shield for decades. The use of turf made these structures resemble natural green hills, blending seamlessly into the landscape. This method of heat retention amazes even experienced modern builders with its efficiency. Don't forget to like this video if you're also amazed by the ingenuity of the ancient craftsmen. What lies behind the beautiful image of these elongated northern houses has a strict mathematical logic. The arrangement of the internal wooden columns followed precise geometric rules and proportions. The hall was always divided into 3 long longitudinal sections by 2 rows of massive support pillars. The central nave was the widest and was intended for movement and for lighting long fires. The side aisles were significantly narrower and were situated behind a row of wooden support columns. These side spaces housed wide wooden platforms that served as places for rest and sleep. The low roof over the side aisles created cozy niches, sheltered from the drafts of the central passageway. Warm air from the fires naturally accumulated in these sleeping areas under the ceiling. The shape of the supporting columns was never perfectly round or absolutely square in cross-section. Craftsmen hewn the edges to create an octagonal or hexadecagonal column profile. This shape better resisted the torsional stresses that arose during severe storms. Additionally, less soot settled on the smooth edges from the constantly burning central fire. The lower ends of the posts, resting on stones, were often subjected to special heat treatment over a fire. The surface of the wood was lightly charred, creating a thin, protective layer of pure carbon. This carbon armor reliably protected the wood from moisture penetration and the development of destructive rot. A post could stand on cold stone for decades, retaining its original strength and hardness. The height of the central posts determined the steepness of the roof slope, which was critically important in the north. A roof that was too shallow would not have withstood the enormous weight of accumulating winter snow and would have collapsed. A roof that was too steep would create excessive resistance to hurricane-force winds, risking being torn off. Craftsmen found the ideal angle of inclination, allowing snow to slide down under its own weight. Deep notches were cut into the upper parts of the posts to accommodate the heavy longitudinal roof beams. These joints bore the main load from the weight of the turf and transferred it vertically downward. Wooden wedges, driven into the remaining gaps with heavy mallets, were used to further secure the beams. The joint became completely rigid, preventing any displacement of the roof elements relative to one another. Interestingly, the surface of the posts was often decorated with intricate carvings featuring geometric patterns. These ornaments served not only an aesthetic function, but also concealed small cracks caused by the wood drying out. Deep carved lines allowed the wood to breathe and relieved internal tension within the trunk. The pillar was covered with an intricate pattern that cast shadows in the uneven light of the hearth's flames. The side aisles were separated from the central aisle not by solid walls, but only by light wooden partitions. This ensured the free circulation of warm air throughout the hall's vast interior. Light from the hearths also penetrated unimpeded into every corner, illuminating the wooden floors. The space remained unified while maintaining a clear, functional zoning for all occupants. The design of such naves allowed for several dozen people to be accommodated under one roof at the same time. The house became a true center of social life, where gatherings, feasts, and craftwork took place. The grandeur of the structure commanded respect from every guest who crossed the massive wooden threshold of this building. Each column embodied the history of the forest and the craftsmanship of the people who had tamed the wild. Could modern architects draw on this experience of creating vast, unsupported spaces out of wood? In the next chapter, you'll learn how they coped with this dreadful weather using an ingenious hearth design. The heart of any longhouse was a long, open hearth located right in the center of the earthen floor. It consisted of a shallow rectangular trench lined with flat river stones along the edges. The length of such a hearth could reach several meters, providing warmth to the entire vast hall. The fire in this hearth was kept burning around the clock throughout the long winter months. The stone edging of the hearth served the vital function of a heat accumulator in the house. During the day, the hot stones absorbed the heat from burning oak and birch logs. At night, when the flames died down and turned into smoldering embers, the stones slowly released the stored heat. This gentle thermal radiation warmed the air around the floorboards, creating a comfortable microclimate for sleeping. Smoke from the open fire rose in a steady column high up toward the wooden roof trusses. It did not fill the lower part of the room thanks to the high ceilings in the central nave of the house. Special openings were cut into the very top of the roof through which the smoke escaped outside. These smoke vents could be opened or closed from the ground using long wooden poles. The hot, smoke-saturated air created a kind of thermal cushion beneath the ceiling. This layer reliably blocked the entry of cold air from the street through the ventilation openings in the roof. In addition, the smoke contained resinous substances that settled on the wooden beams of the interior frame. This coating acted as an excellent antiseptic, preventing the wood from rotting and protecting it from moisture. The fuel used was carefully dried hardwood, which produced a lot of heat and few sparks. Softwoods were rarely used, as they crackled loudly and scattered burning embers. Safety inside a completely wooden structure with straw bedding required special care when handling fire. Specially assigned guards from among the household members constantly monitored the fire to ensure it burned properly. Ashes from the hearth were never simply thrown away, but collected in special wooden tubs. They were used for various household needs, from washing wooden dishes to tanning hides. When mixed with water, the ashes produced lye, which excellently washed away ingrained dirt and grease from surfaces. This was a completely waste-free household, where every element had a specific purpose. The hearth was divided into several functional zones depending on the current needs of the household. In one part, a bright flame was kept burning to light the hall during long, dark evenings. In another part, food was slowly cooked in heavy wrought iron or clay cauldrons over a thick layer of coals. A third zone was used for quickly drying wet outerwear and tanned hides after rain. The light from the flames reflected off the smooth wooden walls, created a warm, golden atmosphere inside the hall. Flickering shadows danced across the carved pillars and massive beams, bringing the interior of the house to life. People gathered around this source of light and heat to repair tools, carve utensils, and sew clothing. The fire was a fgiruan, uniting dozens of people into a single, coordinated mechanism. The long, rectangular shape allowed the maximum number of people to gather around the fire at the same time. Heat was distributed evenly along the entire passageway, leaving no cold spots in the far corners of the room. Even during the harshest Arctic frosts, the interior maintained a temperature sufficient for comfortable work. This well-designed heating system surpassed many later similar solutions. The design of the central hearth required a deep understanding of the laws of physics and the movement of air masses. The builders intuitively calculated the height of the ceilings and the size of the openings to ensure perfect draft in any weather. The longhouse functioned as a huge, perfectly tuned furnace in which people lived. The hearth was truly the hot, pulsating heart of this monumental wooden organism. What would happen if no one knew about this ancient indoor air purification system? Life around an open fire required a constant and powerful supply of fresh oxygen from outside. Without proper ventilation, the huge hall would quickly fill with carbon monoxide, making it impossible to stay there. The builders designed a complex system of hidden air ducts to constantly refresh the air. A supply of fresh, cold air was provided through narrow slits specifically left at the bottom of the doors. This heavy, frosty air crept along the floor, rushing straight toward the red-hot stones of the hearth. Passing over the hearth, the airflow heated up instantly and rushed vertically upward toward the roof. This created a powerful natural draft that constantly drew smoke and stale air out. The doors in the longhouse deserve special mention in the context of retaining internal heat. They were made of thick oak planks, tightly fitted together and reinforced with sturdy crossbars. The doorway always had a high threshold that blocked drafts at floor level when the door was closed. The door itself opened strictly outward so that strong winds would only press it more tightly against the jambs. The entrance area was often equipped with a sort of vestibule, a small extension in front of the main door to the hall. This buffer zone prevented the Arctic cold from entering directly when people entered or exited. A person would first enter the vestibule, close the outer door behind them, and only then open the inner one. This two-door system became the classic solution for all northern regions for centuries to come. Windows, in the modern architectural sense of the word, were completely absent from the longhouse. Any large opening in the wall would have been a source of massive heat loss during the harsh winter months. Daylight entered only through smoke vents in the roof and open doors during the warmer months. The rest of the time, lighting was provided exclusively by the light from the blazing central hearth. In some cases, tiny openings were cut into the walls and covered with a thin layer of translucent leather. They provided minimal light, but allowed one to observe the weather outside without opening the heavy doors. These peculiar viewing slits were located high up under the roof on the leeward side of the building. For the winter, they were tightly sealed with wooden plugs wrapped in dry grass to ensure airtightness. Operating the smoke vents on the roof was a true art, dependent on the direction of the wind. If a storm wind blew from one side, the vent was opened only on the opposite roof slope. The airflow curving around the roof ridge created an area of low pressure above the open vent. This negative pressure literally sucked the smoke out of the room, preventing the wind from blowing out the fire. During periods of complete calm, when natural draft weakened, all available smoke hatches were opened simultaneously. To accelerate the smoke's exit, dry fir branches were tossed into the hearth, creating a powerful column of hot air. The ventilation system was entirely manual and required constant monitoring by the house's inhabitants. Watching the ceiling and checking the air quality was as much a routine as chopping wood. The effectiveness of this system is proven by the fact that people spent long months inside the hall. The air remained breathable, and the wooden structures did not suffer from excessive condensation. The balance between the inflow of icy oxygen and the extraction of hot smoke was maintained with meticulous precision. The building breathed in unison with the surrounding nature, adapting to every whim of the harsh climate. How difficult was it to maintain such a balance every day in the endless Arctic winter? In the next chapter, you'll learn how they coped with this terrible weather by reinforcing the exterior facades. The wood, exposed to the ravages of rain and wind, required serious chemical protection. Craftsmen used a unique mixture based on thick pine resin, which they boiled in huge cauldrons. This hot black mass was applied to the exterior wooden surfaces in a thick, even layer. The process of tarring the facades was carried out regularly, usually on warm, dry summer days. The resin penetrated deep into the wood's pores, polymerizing under direct sunlight. A hard, water-repellent crust formed, over which raindrops rolled off without being absorbed into the fibers. This protective layer also shielded the wood from drying out and cracking during periods of intense heat. The characteristic dark color of resin-treated boards became a hallmark of all northern architecture. Extracting pine resin was hard, dirty work that required special skills and equipment. Deep, funnel-shaped pits were dug in the forests, and their walls were carefully coated with thick, wet clay. Resinous pine roots were packed tightly into these pits and covered with a thick layer of turf. A slow fire was lit inside, causing the resin to melt and flow down to the bottom of the pit through channels. The resulting tar was mixed with natural linseed oil to give the mixture the necessary elasticity. Elasticity was critically important, as the wooden frame constantly expanded and contracted due to temperature fluctuations. A rigid coating would quickly crack and flake off, exposing the unprotected wood to the elements. A properly prepared mixture would stretch to follow the movement of the boards, maintaining the facade's absolute airtightness. They applied the hot resin with special brushes made of stiff plant fibers or coarse burlap. The craftsmen worked quickly, rubbing the boiling liquid into every crack and unevenness on the log's surface. Particular attention was paid to the ends of the wooden components, which were most vulnerable to moisture penetration. The ends were literally saturated with resin all the way through, plugging the wood's capillaries with an impermeable seal. In some cases, a method of surface charring of the outer planks was used before tarring. The open flame of a torch burned away the soft fibers on the surface of the wood, leaving only the hardest structure. The charred layer itself served as excellent protection against rot and decay caused by moisture. Hot resin was then applied over this carbon layer, creating a double, impenetrable armor. The scent of pine tar constantly lingered around the longhouse, mingling with the smell of smoke from the hearth. This aromatic aura repelled rodents that might damage the food supplies inside the building. The resin acted as a natural antiseptic, killing mold and fungal spores before they could reach the walls. The building's biological protection was as carefully designed as its wind protection. The process of renewing the resin layer became an important community event for all residents. People joined forces to cover the vast area of the facades and wooden roof elements in just a few days. They boiled large quantities of tar over communal fires, dividing the tasks among the most experienced craftsmen. This kept the building in perfect condition through dozens of harsh Arctic seasons. Even the carved elements on the door jambs and posts were carefully coated with this protective compound. The carvers took into account that a thick layer of tar would smooth out the fine details of the pattern over time. Therefore, the ornaments were carved deeply and in relief so that they would remain visible even under the black tar coating. The art of carving adapted to the harsh demands of practicality and the material's durability. Unique wood treatment technologies allowed many wooden elements to survive to this day in peat bogs. The chemical composition of pine resin proved so perfect that modern analogs barely surpass it in effectiveness. Ancient chemists intuitively discovered the ideal formula for preserving organic material in a harsh, damp environment. The facades of their houses stood as dark, impregnable bastions against the backdrop of the gray northern sky. The layout of the interior space of the longhouse was strictly governed by the laws of hierarchy and functionality. The vast hall was not a chaotic gathering of people, but rather a clearly structured living space. Each person's place was determined by their status, duties, and position within the settlement's complex social structure. This invisible layout maintained order and discipline within the enclosed space during the long winter months. The most honorable seat was always located in the very center of the hall, opposite the widest part of the hearth. Here stood a tall wooden chair with caved armrests, intended for the head of this large household. Next to it sat the most respected guests and the elders of the community, enjoying the maximum warmth and light. This was the seat of authority from which orders were given and where important life decisions were made. Closer to the exits were sleeping quarters for young workers, guards, and lower-ranking members of the group. It was cooler there, and the smoke from the central fire could be felt a little more strongly than in the center of the hall. However, this arrangement allowed these people to be the first to respond to any external threat or inclement weather. They served as a living shield, protecting the tranquility of the central part of the long wooden house. Along the walls, beneath the low roof slopes, ran wide wooden benches covered with a thick layer of hay. During the day, these platforms were used as workstations for mending nets, sewing clothes, and wood carving. At night, they turned into communal sleeping quarters, where people slept in rows, covered with heavy woolen cloths. The close quarters helped preserve precious body heat during the harshest Arctic frosts. Special attention was paid to storing food supplies, equipment, and valuable handicrafts. For this purpose, small rooms with solid wooden doors were often partitioned off at the ends of the building. These storage rooms were unheated so that meat, dried fish, and grain would remain preserved as long as possible in the cold. Access to these strategic supplies was controlled personally by the head of the household or his trusted assistants. Items that had to remain absolutely dry were hung from the ceiling on crossbeams. There, bundles of medicinal herbs, fishing nets, coils of strong rope, and spare clothing made of tanned leather were dried. Smoke from the fire constantly enveloped these items, further preserving them and protecting them from mold. The upper level of the house served as a sort of open storage area, accessible only by ladder. Weapons were always kept within easy reach of each man's sleeping place, ready for use. Axes, spears, and round wooden shields were hung on special wooden pegs driven directly into the support posts. The metal glinted dimly in the light of the hearth, a reminder of the constant readiness to defend one's home and family. Weapons were not merely tools, but also an important element of the interior, emphasizing the warrior's status. The women's section of the hall was often associated with the location of the vertical loom. This massive wooden mechanism required plenty of light, so it was placed closer to the central aisle and the hearth. The sound of the wooden beater striking the warp threads was a familiar backdrop to the long winter evenings inside the house. Women wove thick woolen cloths, necessary for sewing warm clothing and making durable sails. The layout of the house constantly changed depending on the time of day and the season. During major holidays, the workbenches were cleared away to make room for long banquet tables. The hall turned into a huge dining room where echoes carried loud conversations and the clinking of cups. After the feast ended, the tables were dismantled and the house regained its austere, everyday appearance. This flexibility and multifunctionality of the space made the longhouse an ideal machine for survival. The architecture did not restrict people's lives, but merely provided a convenient framework for their daily activities. The boundaries between zones were arbitrary, yet strictly observed by all members of this close-knit northern community. The dwelling united them into a single whole, compelling them to function as a single, well-coordinated mechanism. The choice of a site for building a huge, long house was never a random or hasty decision. The builders carefully studied the terrain, the direction of prevailing winds, and proximity to sources of fresh water. A small hill, protected from the north by a high cliff or a dense patch of forest, was considered the ideal location. The cliff served as a natural breakwater for hurricane-force winds, breaking their force even before they reached the walls. The building's orientation relative to the cardinal directions was critical for preserving heat and structural integrity. The house was always positioned so that its narrow end faced the strongest and coldest winds. The wide roof slopes and long side facades remained in the aerodynamic shadow, avoiding the brunt of the elements. This simple rule saved the structures from destruction during the most violent Arctic blizzards. If construction took place on a hillside, the builders would cut part of the building directly into the earthen mass. One of the long walls became a retaining wall, resting on the natural terrain and using it as additional insulation. Soil from the hill was piled over the roof of this sunken section, creating a smooth transition from nature to architecture. The house literally grew out of the slope, becoming its integral and harmonious extension. Proximity to the sea or fjord was vital for people whose livelihoods depended on ships. However, the house was never built right at the water's edge to avoid flooding during severe autumn storms. A safe distance was maintained, which was often used for pulling boats ashore and repairing gear. The path from the threshold to the water had to be straight and convenient for carrying heavy loads. The presence of a reliable source of drinking water nearby was another crucial factor in choosing a location. A stream or spring had to remain flowing during hot summers and not freeze solid in cold winters. Water was needed constantly for washing, cooking, processing wood and leather, and for extinguishing potential fires. Often, the course of a small stream was deliberately diverted closer to the house using wooden troughs. The landscape also dictated the shape and size of the adjacent outbuildings surrounding the main structure. Barns, smithies, and workshops were positioned to create additional barriers against the cold wind. The entire complex of buildings formed a kind of inner courtyard, bustling with activity on days with relatively calm weather. These structures protected the central longhouse like fortress walls. The trees growing on the selected site were not completely cut down, but rather selectively removed. Strong oaks and ash trees were left standing to serve as natural protection against the wind from the sea. Their massive canopies dispersed air currents, reducing wind pressure on the wooden walls and thatched roof. Nature and architecture worked in close harmony, helping people survive in extreme conditions. Draining meltwater and rainwater away from the foundation was another challenge solved by the terrain. Builders dug deep drainage ditches around the perimeter of the house, directing water down the natural slope of the hill. The bottom of the ditches was lined with small stones to prevent soil erosion from strong currents during downpours. The soil beneath the stone foundation of the house always remained dry and firm, ensuring the stability of the structure. In the rocky tundra, where it was impossible to dig into the ground, houses were built entirely on the surface. In such cases, the aerodynamics of the shape were given absolute and paramount importance. The roof sloped down almost to the ground, transforming the building into a smooth, flattened hill of wood and stone. The wind simply rolled over it, finding no vertical surfaces to strike. An intuitive understanding of the landscape allowed northern builders to erect reliable shelters where others would have retreated. Their homes did not defy nature, but wisely adapted to its harsh yet predictable laws. Every log and every stone was in its place, forming a perfect mechanism for life. It was an art of fitting human life into the wild and cold landscape of the Arctic coast. The construction of such grandiose structures would have been impossible without specialized and reliable iron tools. The carpenter's primary tool was a battle and work axe with a wide blade forged from high-quality steel. The angle of the blade allowed for the removal of the finest shavings from the log, achieving a perfectly smooth surface. The axe was an extension of the master's hand, a versatile tool for cutting, hewing, and fine-fitting parts. To cut deep grooves and create complex joints, a variety of chisels with curved blades were used. The chisel was struck from top to bottom, allowing wood to be quickly and precisely removed from the recesses. This tool was indispensable for creating ship frames and the curved supporting arches of a longhouse. An experienced carpenter could use a chisel to cut a groove of any complexity without using additional gouges. Holes for wooden dowels were drilled using massive hand-cranked drills. The drill bits were forged by hand and had a spoon-shaped form, which cut through the dense grain of oak and ash with great efficiency. The drilling process required immense physical effort, especially when working with dry wood. Through holes in thick beams were drilled with precision to ensure the dowel fit with maximum tension. Sturdy wooden and iron wedges were used to split straight logs into planks. A wedge was driven into the end of the log with a heavy wooden mallet, causing the wood to split strictly along the grain. This method produced long, strong planks that were superior in quality to those cut with a saw. A split plank retained the natural structure of the wood, making it resistant to breaking and moisture damage. Iron scrapers were used to quickly remove thick bark from freshly felled trunks. This tool consisted of a curved blade with two wooden handles on either end. The craftsman pulled the scraper toward himself, removing the bark in long, even strips without damaging the wood itself. Logs cleaned in this way dried faster and were less susceptible to pest attacks. Measuring instruments as we understand them today did not exist. All calculations were made using measuring ropes. Knots were tied at equal intervals along the ropes, creating a universal standard of length for the entire structure. Geometry was checked by simply stretching the cords along the diagonals of the rectangle to achieve perfectly right angles. The master builder's eye and experience were more reliable than any complex drawings or rulers. Blacksmiths played no less a role in construction than the carpenters themselves, constantly repairing and sharpening tools. Every blade had to be razor sharp to cut cleanly through the dense structure of northern timber. The forges were bustling with work as new wedges, axes, and sturdy knives for fine carving were forged. Metal was worth its weight in gold, and the tools were cared for with particular diligence. Rough sandstone and stiff, dry leather were used to sand the finished wooden surfaces. The boards were rubbed until they became completely smooth and pleasant to the touch. The absence of splinters was an important condition for a comfortable life inside a wooden dwelling with an earthen floor. This final finish gave the interior of the house a finished and noble appearance. A craftsman's set of tools was his greatest treasure, carefully passed down from father to son. Axes and chisels served for decades, their handles darkened with sweat and took on the perfect shape of the palm. Losing a good axe was tantamount to a real tragedy, as forging a new one was a long and expensive process. Tools were respected and imbued with a spirit of their own, with particularly fine examples given their own resonant names. The combination of these simple yet incredibly effective tools made it possible to create masterpieces of wooden architecture. Without complex technology, people erected buildings that were striking in their scale and structural ingenuity. Their axes left their mark not only on the logs, but also on the very history of northern architecture. Longhouses stood for centuries, silently bearing witness to the great craftsmanship of their builders. We have examined only a small fraction of the engineering solutions that helped ancient builders survive on land. Their craftsmanship proves that the human mind is capable of finding the perfect answer to any challenge posed by the harsh, natural environment. Please suggest topics in the comments for future videos on the history of ancient technologies that you'd like to see. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our new, exciting historical explorations.